co-ops can contribute to a fairer society in a couple of ways. It sort of goes back to there's an economic thing where you can just get a better deal working together in a democratic way through a cooperative than you might be able to otherwise, like the Stocksy example.
Mm-hmm.
So there's an economic element. And I think with that, it can complement other things. So it's not either or, that we're just going to have co-ops and nothing else. If you think that the tax system needs reform or that things can be done through tax, like that still stands. But alongside that, co-ops can actually provide you a means to do, I guess, a fairer distribution of wealth and opportunity even before the tax system kicks in and maybe redistributes some opportunities and wealth in society.
Welcome to Justice Matters, the podcast inspiring a world where everyone belongs. I'm your host, Tim Buxton. Hey there guys, it's Tim here with Justice Matters, and I got off a Zoom conversation with Amthony Taylor. Now, he is the Research and Policy Advisor for the Business Council of Corporates and Mutuals. Now, I know it's a bit of a mouthful, but in short, we just had a great conversation about business and justice and the role that cooperatives play in that. Now, co-ops, you've probably heard of food co-ops, mutuals, banks, all those kinds of stuff. We get into the nitty-gritty of that. But what I love about Amthony is his passion to see society mutually flourishing, and even in his role of providing policy advice in governments and advice to businesses and different groups and small businesses and charities and organisations out there trying to make a difference in the world. He's just got such a passion to see equality in our world and people flourishing. And I hope you enjoy this conversation. I geeked out a little bit on it and really enjoyed just chatting with him. And I think it really brings a good balance to some of the other subjects we've covered, which have been more along the lines of social enterprise, whereas this is got a bit more of a business flavour. So if that's your thing, then I know you're going to enjoy it. Anyways, thanks so much for listening in, guys. I hope you enjoy this episode with Amthony Taylor. Mate, just doing some prep for our chat. I was just, I was pretty impressed by your accomplishments and achievements. I mean, you're a lawyer. And obviously have passions in arts and law in your time in university. But for someone who's a lawyer, I'm pretty impressed that you've kind of not decided to climb the corporate ladder and essentially go down that path, but you've really chosen a path that engages your passion for law to see businesses that engage in basically mutual flourishing, really. And what could you just like give us a bit of a snapshot of why? Like why did you take that trajectory in life? Were there any inspiring moments? Because we're going to talk specifically a bit about co-ops and how they can really be a force for good in society and addressing, I think, justice and inequality. But yeah, let's start maybe back at those early formative times for you that kind of made a law grad go down that path.
Yeah, so I am a lawyer, but I feel like I haven't practiced, and I guess that's part of what you're getting at, Tim, is where I ended up with not practicing and doing something slightly different. I guess I was always an unwilling law student, so it's sort of making out like this is a very noble thing I did. Maybe that's, not the whole story. But I guess I was, when I was going through law school, I was kind of thinking about, what would I do with this, or what would be interesting to do with some legal knowledge. And one of the things I was doing while I was studying, one of my part-time jobs was at the Student Union Cafe, which was run as a collective. And I guess that's where I kind of, it wasn't a co-op strictly, but it kind of had some of the similar ideas. So I started thinking, you can actually do things like you could support social enterprise, or you could support cooperatives, and people, that's something you can do if you have some legal knowledge. So I guess that was a little seed that kind of happened while I was in uni, and I was lucky enough to end up in a role where that's basically what I'm doing now, which is pretty cool. So,
you work for BCCM, which stands for business.
I'm just going to see if you can get through it.
Okay. I'm going to see.
I've had lots of practice.
You have lots of.
It is a difficult one.
I'm gonna see if I can get this.
All right.
Business. Now, the reason I may know this is because you came as a guest lecturer at University QUT, where I'm studying, and you presented on this stuff. So, but Business Council for Cooperatives and Mutuals. How did I go?
Got it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I won't admit that I was slightly cheating, but anyways, so you're a research policy advisor for them now. Maybe give us a bit of a snapshot of now how you're using obviously your legal skills and what you are for the work that they do, and maybe explain a bit about who BCCM is.
So the BCCM is the national peak body, representative body for cooperatives and mutuals in Australia. And so with my role as the policy and research advisor, part of our job as the peak body is advocating to government and to anyone about how the environment can be better for co-ops to operate in. So that's probably the area where the legal background is helpful, because a lot of that is looking at things like regulation, legislation, and saying how it could be improved for cooperatives and mutuals in Australia. But we do a lot of other stuff as well at the Business Council. We support our members to network, and we also develop a lot of educational resources and have a focus on, I guess, general information and education for people, for co-ops, but also for the community. So if there's a group out in the community that wants to find out about co-ops, we maintain lots of free resources on our website about that. And so a big part of my role is in advocacy, but it's a bit of everything else that we do as well, which is things like that, talking to, as you were saying, I came and had a chat to your class, just a general chat about co-ops the other week. That's part of our role as well. And that's a really fun part of the role, is just getting to have a chat to people about co-ops. Yeah.
So maybe let's talk about what are co-ops, because my first interaction with them, I wouldn't say first, but one that kind of springs to mind for me is when I was back in the USA and I joined REI, which is like an outdoor retail kind of giant, you could say, and they sell all kinds of outdoor equipment, and you had to join the membership to, with the membership fee to join it. But a lot of people may, interact with them with food co-ops, you at your farmers markets or some kind of ways. But there's just such a diverse array of them that can be really surprising. Maybe, and we've talked a lot about social enterprises on this podcast because, in the not-for-profit charity space, they're really an important component of really making a social impact. But I really don't, want co-ops to be overlooked, even in the whole realm of having a significant social impact. So maybe dive in to give listeners a bit more of an explanation. Just a brief explanation of what co-ops are and what makes them unique. And it'd be great.
Sure. So a co-op is a member-owned business. That's the basic concept. And then who could be a member of a co-op? It could be consumers, it could be producers, or that's another way of saying businesses. It could be a group of workers, or it could be a community of interest. This is still pretty abstract, so I'll give some examples of this. And one example that you just mentioned is REI in the US, the hardware outdoors co-op. So that's an example of a consumer co-op. So your ownership is as a consumer. If you want to go and shop there, you need to become a member, and you stay a member and have an ownership stake in that business because you shop there. That's a consumer co-op. Another example of that is a mutual bank or a credit union like Bank Australia. If you sign up and open an account with Bank Australia, you've actually become a member because you're a customer, and you're as a member, you're a part owner and have a say in that cooperative financial institution or credit union. So that's consumer ownership, one type of co-op. But you can have businesses coming together or producers coming together to form a co-op, and a typical version of that is a farmers co-op like Norco, where farmers build their own processing plant rather than relying on someone else. Or often when those co-ops start, there just wasn't anyone else to do it, so the farmers got together and did it in that local community. And then you can have worker co-ops. Some people might have heard of worker co-ops. You can run any business. You could set up a cafe and run it as a worker co-op where all the staff are part owners. And then a community of interest, a typical sort of place where that comes up is something like community energy, where maybe in a local region you want to build a solar power plant, and anyone who's kind of supportive of it could invest some money in the co-op and stay involved in that way. And they have an interest in renewable energy. And then it can get more complicated because you can have a thing called multi-stakeholder, where you start mixing these. It's not so common, but you could start having like a co-op that was farmers and workers together or something. And we're also seeing now things like platform co-ops where it's going into the digital age. And you have something like Stocksy, which is a stock image platform where you can buy stock images as a customer, which is owned by the photographers.
Right.
It's owned by the photographers and also the people who work for Stocksy to run the site, so the workers in the business as well. That's a multi-stakeholder example, and it's digital. It just runs an online marketing platform for those stock photographers. And why do you bother having this type of ownership, which is a bit different to what we're used to in business, which is investors or an entrepreneur owning something by themselves or in a small group? It's to give benefits to those people, to share some benefits as customers or as farmers or whatever. So if we took that example I was just talking about, Stocksy, why did they set up a co-op? It was because they weren't getting a good deal from the existing stock image marketing sites. I can't remember the name of the big firms in that market, but they weren't getting a good deal. The cut that they got as the people actually creating the artwork was pretty small.
Right.
They set up their own one, and they can share the benefits when they get it out to someone who buys the stock image. Much more of the benefit goes back to those people, and they share it in a way that's fair between them as well. They work out a way that they think is fair.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of makes you think of the businesses or the workers that kind of are just employees for someone who owns the company and just reaps all the profits essentially. And if you're smart enough or are business savvy enough to be able to set it all up yourself, and obviously there's great investment and entrepreneurs take great risks and whatnot to get to that place, but it does then create a greater sense of shared value in the wealth and the work that is produced from that sense. And maybe we could go dig a bit deeper into why that actually creates a greater sense of equality and justice in society. Because I noted when you were filling out the form that you mentioned Margaret Thatcher and her kind of quote that there is no such thing as society, and that kind of really rubbed you a bit wrong. And maybe I just want to push in there a little bit, like how is what you're saying in this idea of cooperatives really a force for bringing equality and maybe in an unjust economy? Yeah,
so I think we shouldn't be too utopian about co-ops. They're not going to solve everything, but with that quote, which she may or may not have actually said, but that sort of line of thinking, I think, has something like COVID has shown us, right, that we do live in a society. We do need coordinated action and we rely on coordinated action like by our governments as well to do things. It does, like, it's just reality. And there's other ways that people can do this as well through not just co-ops, but through local not-for-profit organizations and all sorts of things. But co-ops are part of that spectrum of things where a group of people can get together and coordinate to do something they couldn't do by themselves. And I think that idea is, well, it's true and really important, and it just sort of goes against the grain of that line of thinking that maybe was prevalent around that era in the 80s and onwards for a while. So I think co-ops can contribute to a fairer society in a couple of ways. It sort of goes back to, there's an economic thing where you can just get a better deal working together in a democratic way through a cooperative than you might be able to otherwise, like the Stocksy example. So there's an economic element. And I think with that, it can complement other things. So it's not either or, that we're just going to have co-ops and nothing else. If you think that the tax system needs reform or that things can be done through tax, like, that still stands. But alongside that, co-ops can actually provide you a means to do, I guess, a fairer distribution of wealth and opportunity even before the tax system kicks in and maybe redistributes some opportunities and wealth in society, just as an example. So it could complement other things that people want to do to have a better society, I think. And another thing it does is co-ops are democratic. They're one member, one vote. That's a really strong principle of co-ops. So I think it encourages participation as well. There's a sort of civic participation element to co-ops where people, which is the same, I think, as your local sports club or lots of other organizations as well that are democratically run, where people can get experience participating in a management committee, or they can learn new skills. There's an education and I guess the language now sometimes is capacity building that you maybe in
well, there's shared wisdom, right? When everybody suddenly has equal input or the ability to make an input on decisions that are made, because one, they're in the community, they're might be far more attuned to how the decisions or the impacts that a business is making will have on that community that they're in. And there's so much more that they could also contribute to making the co-op run more effectively and efficiently as well, right?
Absolutely. That's a really good point, Tim. I think there's an empowerment element, and if you thought of maybe a marginalized community, a co-op could be a better way for them to empower themselves rather than having a top-down approach or
someone at the top, the owner or the board or someone far disconnected making all the decisions, which tend to be in a very maybe more capitalistic sense, concerned mostly about bottom dollar, right? Profit.
Yeah. So I think with a co-op, because the purpose is different, you're trying to deliver benefits to it's still a business. You still need to, like not-for-profits as well, you still need to be sustainable.
It's kind of my rub against that name, not-for-profit. It's like, hang on.
Like, people get the wrong idea, don't they?
Yeah. Well, it's not that we want to make a loss. It's not like we're for loss. we're not. Our purpose is social impact, not making some kind of
so
share price hike or whatever.
I didn't make this up. I think my boss, the CEO of the council, likes this. I'll attribute it to her. Melina says co-ops make money to do things rather than doing things to make money, which is the same as a lot of other purpose-led organizations, right? That you need to find a way to be sustainable financially. But it's really for this core purpose that you have, which is around benefits to members. And I didn't get to with the talking about what are co-ops. They're basically member-owned businesses, but there is an international definition of co-ops. The co-op movement is a global movement where it's a bit like social enterprise more broadly, where people, discuss what is this, and it's an ongoing discussion. But there is a definition that the co-op movement agrees on globally that basically encapsulates what I was saying about member ownership and democratic control. And we have principles as well, and it's all designed to focus co-ops on that purpose of delivering. It's often an economic benefit, but it also acknowledges it can be social and cultural benefits, and aspirations that the members have as well are an important part of what co-ops are formed and exist to do.
Yeah. And even when you talk about that economic benefit is a shared mutual flourishing economic benefit, which to me, it seems to be the real key component. It's not Jeff Bezos making billions off of Amazon, and the result of, employees or working for $7 an hour in some misery, you know what I mean? Like that idea of economic benefit and flourishing is that you can actually do this where everybody flourishes and everybody benefits in that sense, in a more just sense, a just way, right?
Yeah, and I think the interesting part of it is that, and it went back to, I think you were saying, if a business is set up in another way, probably the person who found it has taken on a lot of risk. So in a co-op, you're kind of asking for people to spread that risk and take on some of the responsibility as well. That's the flip side of it, where, we're not going to wait for Jeff Bezos, but everyone's going to have to maybe wear a little risk if they want to do it this other way.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
that's where the rubber hits the road, I think.
That's
not everything necessarily is going to be a co-op, because you might not be able to pull it together that way.
Yeah, exactly. There's horses for courses. Some people just are quite content to not have to take any risk and just be paid a wage and come and go and punch their time card in, and that's good. But just getting back to a bit more of your work, why is it so important? And maybe I'm nailing down in on this kind of this need for economic justice, and how co-ops can be a way for ensuring that there is where there isn't such an economic oppression on those who are already, marginalized in society. And we think of how it doesn't even feel like governments run the world anymore. It's these large corporations that run the world, these large tech firms now it is. And in the past, it might have been oil companies. And we're seeing a shift in where the power lies in society. Why is it so important that your work where it kind of addresses the systemic nature of the business realm and policies being made, and as you say, you're an advocate, you speak in Parliament, you talk about these things. How is that, and why is that just so important in creating a just society?
Well, I guess one of the issues that the Business Council exists to address is probably just the basic awareness about co-ops as part of the economic landscape that already exists and already have an impact, especially in some certain sectors like agriculture and insurance. And just as an example, I think 8 in 10 Australians are a member of a co-op or a mutual. A lot of that is through things like if you're part of a mutual bank or a credit union or a mutual health insurer, but you probably don't know it. And a little bit of that is on the sector, and that's kind of why the Business Council is there, is to try and rectify that. We're a collective body of the sector saying, we need to actually get out there and let people know this is it's already a good sector to build on, but also that getting probably more to your question is around, why does it matter in the first place?
Yeah, why?
That co-ops and mutuals can actually shift the power in markets in favour of consumers, in favour of farmers. They can actually shape markets so that they're the way that people can get a better deal in the economy, basically, especially if they go to a significant scale and have market share. But I think the other side of it, which goes to that more civil society part of it, I think is the capacity building, the chance for people to participate in democratic forums that are outside the traditional political democracy. And I would say that I think co-ops and mutuals complement that. So we don't have to rely just on having the right representatives in Parliament. We can also build economic democracy.
I love that, the economic democracy. I see, I work with a lot of people that do incredible work in poor countries to try, there's organizations like Kiva that offer microloans and honestly, economic empowerment, especially of marginalized women in particular, who are quite often not enabled to really get into business ownership in certain countries and parts of the world where there's women's rights and equality just aren't recognized, same as here in Australia or the West. But economic empowerment is such a key component, really, of alleviating poverty and I guess, as you're saying, that capacity building and saying, hey, look, not everyone is going to be able to be an entrepreneur and just do a little business course and run their own business effectively and make it, right? Like, we even see here in Australia where there's so much support for small businesses, for however many small businesses that start, there's X amount, a high percentage that just can't make it. They just don't have that resiliency to push through. But what you're saying is this model actually eliminates maybe a lot of that risk and ensures that economic empowerment is given back to the people in a way that could, especially those that really wouldn't have the ability to really make it, can.
Absolutely. And I think small business is even a good example. Small businesses can join together in co-ops and it can help them reduce some of those stresses, I guess, that is really hard on if you're a single entrepreneur or, startup, someone running a startup, and at least you can share some of the costs or some of the risk of doing that. Even that in itself is a good example of where you could be cooperating to see more of these small businesses long lasting.
Let me tell you about one of our partners, Freedom Broadband. They're an incredible profit for purpose business. Freedom Broadband is your all-in-one internet and telephone service provider, whether it's for your business or your home. Now, their internet connection and speeds are simply amazing, and they're in another league when it comes to the quality of their customer service. But here's what really sets them apart. When you switch to any of their services, they'll donate $5 every month to a non-profit cause of your choice. As the founder of You Belong, an Australian-based non-profit charity, one of the greatest challenges we face is fundraising, and I think I can speak for almost all leaders in the non-profit world when I say that being able to have a residual income coming into your accounts to support your work is a dream come true. And like most nonprofits, our work is dependent on the generous support of individuals and groups that share our passion to empower refugees to integrate and thrive here in Australia. But what that means is that we spend more time and energy looking for ways to raise support, and what I'd desperately love to be doing is spending that time and our limited resources developing and growing the many successful programs that we run. But here's where our friends at Freedom Broadband come in. You see, a few months back, I was on a 4G wireless connection at home through one of the largest phone and internet companies here in Australia. And each month I was nervous about going over our usage, getting a nasty bill at the end. And I was working on a lot of the podcasting and videos at home, and the speeds I was getting were just painfully debilitating. And I finally decided to give Freedom Broadband a call, and within 2 minutes I was on the call with Graham completing my application, and within a week I had completely switched over to their $79 a month unlimited plan. And I can tell you firsthand, the service has been phenomenal. And I have a direct line to their customer service team whenever I have a question or need assistance. And now the studio and office where I work has switched over to Freedom Broadband as well. We're on their business plan and we haven't looked back. And how cool is this? Little by little, connection by connection, Aussie owned and locally run Freedom Broadband. Ugh. And how cool is this? Little by little, connection by connection, Aussie owned and locally run Freedom Broadband is now actively supporting the great work of non-profits in communities all around Australia. Simply by switching your internet to Freedom Broadband, you can help transform the lives of those less fortunate. And that's why I love these guys. And get this, head to freedombroadband.com.au and quote Justice Matters on your application form, and they will donate $50 from the activation fee to support Justice Matters. That's going to enable us to continue this podcast and inspire the world where everyone belongs. That's freedombroadband.com.au. Say goodbye to expensive, mediocre internet with poor customer service and hello to top-notch internet service and the good feeling of knowing you're supporting a great cause. Join Freedom Broadband today. Quote Justice Matters and let's partner together with the internet that's helping to change the world. Is there any particular co-op that's like maybe one of the most interesting or maybe the most exciting or something maybe you've been involved with that you're passionate about? I'd love to hear a good example from you.
Yeah, well, it's tough. I'll probably cheat and go into a couple if that's right, Tim.
Yeah, take a couple, yeah.
I mean, I really wanted to share with people one called Silk, Supporting Independent Living Cooperative, which is a co-op started up about 5 years ago in the specialist disability accommodation industry. So I think the NDIS is a good example where co-ops could really help, because the NDIS has been set up with this idea of empowering individuals, more choice and control for individuals with a disability. But to really realize that, I think it needs to be coordinated by those people so they can get more out of their budgets and really exercise control. Because if it's just left to a totally free market situation without a diversity of providers, maybe without some coordination by consumers and some leverage for consumers, I just don't see that goal will be met. So this co-op is one example where that's starting to happen, where the co-op is actually a co-op of co-ops, and the individual co-ops are small specialist houses that have been set up by parents with children or guardians for people with disability. And by joining the co-op, all these individual houses get the economy of scale. They can spread costs.
Right.
And suddenly the budget that you're getting through NDS can go a lot further, and you can do a lot more with it and get really good outcomes. So I think, it just seems like a no-brainer, and those guys are actually doing it though. So
really
check them out.
Silk, and SILC is the acronym there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome.
So, I mean, but this probably shows the diversity of co-ops, and that can really apply to any group that wants to use it. Is one that I had a little role in, I can't claim too much, with setting up, was the Limestone Coast Fishermen's Co-op.
Yeah.
Which was a new co-op of lobster fishermen. Lobster fishers in South Australia who they'd seen there's another really successful lobster co-op in WA, the Geraldton Fishermen's Co-op.
Mm-hmm.
They felt like they weren't getting a good deal from foreign-owned processors in their region, and could sort of see writing on the wall with that, where things were going. So they set up their co-op and started processing themselves and trying to get a better deal. And so, they're not, I guess, lobster fishermen, maybe, it's quite different to people with disability and the NDIS, but there's a similar logic. And I just really enjoyed working with them. They really got the ethos, I think, of cooperatives, and that's always great. and they're
So you
actually
got
featured.
some lobster fishermen with some suits on now, right? Like, not maybe not
Yeah,
necessary, but I
well,
think that
they
highlights.
they well, it's interesting that maybe if COVID hadn't hit, that might have been the case, but they started up just before COVID, but they're still going. They managed to get through that because that obviously has got a lot of impact on trade,
Oh yeah,
which
I
is
can
important for the
imagine.
lobster industry. But they're actually featured in a documentary that was on ABC called Fight Back Farmers.
Mm.
That's still up on iView.
Okay, Fight Back Farmers, check that out.
And it's got a couple other co-ops, farming co-ops as well. So yeah, check it out. Look, I could go on. Yeah, heaps of co-ops. I mean, maybe just one last one quickly would be there's a recent community buyout in suburban Melbourne in Montmorency.
Okay.
So a group there got together and there was a old church that wasn't being used that was going to be sold off to developers, and the community got together, formed a co-op to buy the land and try and find some community uses for it.
Mm.
So we're seeing a lot of that now, and that's a really great story when a community can do that through a co-op.
Wow. I mean, there's just so, like you said, it can almost apply to any industry, really. As you highlighted with Stocksy, I think it was.
Yep.
I keep thinking of iStock, which might be one of the
one.
big companies
iStock.
that probably it was exploiting photographers and artists. And speaking of art, on a completely different tangent, you're quite the artist yourself, is that correct? Or you just like to tinkle around with the drums and guitar and
I know a little bit of. I wouldn't say I'm an artist. I studied Indonesian, but I studied Indonesian language and also Indonesian literature at uni. That was the other thing.
Kidding. Well, here's something fun fact for you. I was born in Indonesia, so but I was born in Bandung.
There you go.
So just outside of Jakarta, there you would know. Don't speak a lick of Bahasa, right? And I'm not. I was a wee one when my parents came back to Australia, but I do have like a lot of photos and all the little trinkets are around the house at my parents' house of Indonesia. But so you can speak some fluent Indonesian?
I'm pretty rusty now, Tim, but yeah, I did learn Indonesian, and I, if I had a couple of weeks to warm up, I could say I was proficient, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Give us, can you give us something?
Apa kabar?
Apa kabar. Is that like,
that's how are you?
How are you? Awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, I love it. It's always, and it's, obviously Indonesia's a good neighbor. Have you seen any cool co-ops in Indonesia? Have you spent some time up there and learned a thing from other parts of the world?
Yeah, so there is a big co-op movement in Indonesia. Like, they have a co-op department. So it's like
really
it's a big thing in Indonesia. I think when you look at post-colonial countries have an interesting relationship with co-ops because a lot of the time, and not only post-colonial countries, but the relationship with government and co-ops there is a bit more top-down, or sometimes there's a legacy of that, where the government sort of maybe at one point set up co-ops for people. So sometimes they have a legacy sector like that they're kind of dealing with. But yeah, they have a massive co-op sector there. Like Australia, there's a massive credit union or mutual banking sector. That's really important. But yeah, Indonesia, probably if I wasn't doing co-op stuff, I'd be trying to do something to do with Indonesia. It's an amazing country, I guess. It's so many islands and so many languages. Like it's a really diverse nation. It's sort of amazing, and it's had its struggles with that. But being brought together as a nation is quite amazing in a way. So it's more than just Bali. There's a lot going on. So that would be, I'd say, is if you go to Bali, also go pick another island and check it out.
Yeah, Java,
Go
Sumatra.
to Java or anywhere. There's a lot going on. Java's got some really amazing places to visit. Yogyakarta, for example.
Yeah. Oh man, that's awesome. And well, I think we've kind of had a really good yarn and a good yak. What would to inspire people to maybe look into it a bit more? What's your final pitch, or what's your final thing you'd like to share with our listeners today?
I guess I have to give a plug for the BCCM website, which is bccm.coop or .coop. That's another thing. Co-ops have their own domain.
Oh yeah.
You can be if you form a co-op, you can get a .coop website. Check out our website. There's lots of information on there. I'm happy. My details are somewhere on the website, so people can get in contact with me if they're doing some sort of social enterprise or social thing that might be a co-op. I'm always happy to have a chat. I think I think I mentioned this in the class when I was speaking to you, Tim. Like, if people want a more deeper dive into co-ops, sort of the history and the philosophy around them, I'd recommend looking up Nathan Schneider, who's a US journalist who writes about co-ops and wrote a book called I'm going to forget the name now, Everything for Everyone, that talks about co-ops. And it kind of captures this thing about co-ops that they're very, like, they apply to everything. Then they're kind of a mundane thing in a way, like they're just businesses that provide goods and services to people. But they've also kind of got this edge of being quite radical at the same time. And I think he kind of has a way of capturing that nicely.
I love that. Yeah, it's a great point to finish on, that this is just everyday life. It's what we do, right? We wake up, we do business, we might make things, we might provide a service, or whatever that might be. This is everyday life, but in a way, restoring it in and redeeming maybe some of the more elements to where people can exploit and take advantage of that, and making sure that it's done, which seems radical, right? It seems radical, the steps we have to take to make sure that we live in a fair society, and that exploitation and greed doesn't bleed into our lives in ways it doesn't need to. So hats off for all the great work that you do, the behind the scenes work of research, of policy, of sharing and creating awareness. Really appreciate what you're doing and the contribution you're making, and the ways you share that so freely with others. Really appreciate it, Anthony, and coming on and sharing about it.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Justice Matters. I'd also like to shout out to the Patreon community that financially supports this podcast. Guys, thank you so much for your support. And you can join them simply by going to patreon.com/Justice Matters, where a simple donation of $5 a month, you can become part of the Patreon community and get access to behind the scenes content and extras that I share just with you. And lastly, there is another really important way that you can help support the podcast, and that's simply by rating it or leaving a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, maybe by subscribing on YouTube. Yes, we are a video podcast as well. Guys, thank you so much for listening in to this episode of Justice Matters. Please come again soon. I can't wait to share more episodes with you. Thank you so much. I'm your host, Tim Buxton. Thanks for listening.